Have you ever sat and wondered why you will rarely find black women wearing their natural hair, or how much the beauty industry has benefited from the history of black hair? No? Well, I have, and I have decided to do a deep dive. After all, this Afro hair dysmorphia, if that's what I can call it, has created multiple million-dollar industries in Asia and the US. But let's start by wondering, what is Afro hair? Many times Afro hair is used to describe any hair texture that appears tightly curled or a hairstyle. However, it's neither a hairstyle or just any tight curls. Imagine a metal spring ringlet. Now imagine it so tiny that you can barely even see those coils. Now imagine millions of them. That is an afro. An afro remains an afro whether it's wet, brushed, unbrushed, tangled, detangled, etc. It's not a style that only comes to be when hair is brushed. I say this because in recent years, many people who don't have kinky or afro hair would brush their curls out and call it afro hair. And while that isn't the case, as you can imagine, it's called an afro because it's a hair texture mostly found in sub-Saharan Africans. That being said, surprisingly, you will also find that hair texture amongst the indigenous people of Papua New Guinea and in one of Asia's most ancient tribes, the Jarawas. The tightness of those coils differ from person to person, so does the volume. Some people, like the Sudanese of North Africa, tend to have more fine kinky hair, for instance. But now that we have learned what Afro hair is and looks like, let's get back to the topic at hand. How did this unique hair texture help boost the economy of multiple Asian countries as well as the US? Well, slavery and colonialism. I know some people will roll their eyes hearing this, but it's true. The policing of Afro hair started the moment those missionaries got off the boat in Africa. What is referred to today as protective hairstyles were hairstyles created to show the status of both men and women, symbolizing the marital status as well as what importance they had in their village or community. However, many of those hairstyles, as well as the natural hair texture, was not deemed accepted during colonization. When building Catholic schools for kids in many African nations, it was mandatory that both boys and girls cut their hair short as uniform. That mentality continued well until adulthood. The idea of short hair looking neater and smarter than a big afro. To this day, you will still find many schools across Africa that still force girls to shave their heads for school. Now, some of you might be thinking, so what? Colonization is over now. Yes, but those 300 years and more did shape how many generations saw their hair. Fortunately, after freedom, many went back to allowing girls to grow and love their natural hair as well as to wear traditional African hairstyles. However, that would be short-lived because on the other side of the world, there was a different fight going on that would shape how black women all over the Western world would see and wear their hair. In the US, hair policing looked quite different. For a long time, black American women were allowed to wear their hair in braids. However, since they were slaves with no proper resources for self-care, their hair would often look unkempt. They would look after their slave masters, making sure them and their kids looked well kept, but had little to no time to look after themselves. As a solution, many covered their hair. It's also important to note that many hairstyles were deemed distracting and uncivilized. Even a simple hairstyle such as an afro puff would have been triggering. When slavery ended, black and mixed-race people were trying to find their way into the normal working world as free people, but there was a noticeable pattern. People who were either mixed and didn't have afro hair had it much easier in the working world, not saying there was no struggle. However, white people were more willing to work with someone who was lighter and had a straight or looser hair texture because it was deemed more professional to them. Both black men and women noticed this, and so the search for a solution began. The first solution being the hot comb. Now, the hot comb was already created in France. However, Americans improved and popularized it. It became a daily routine for black men and women to use the hot comb to create straight and wavy textured hair. But that wasn't enough, because it wasn't permanent. In comes crack in a bottle, also known as the relaxer. The relaxer was actually created by accident in 1909. Garrett Augustus Morgan was not looking for a way to straighten his hair, which is probably why there were so many toxic chemicals in there to begin with. However, it worked for hair, and so it was sold as a hair product. This helped people blend in and be deemed more acceptable for the working world and the media. If you look at many black American first in the entertainment industry, you will find that none of them were out wearing afros. Why? Because that was not the acceptable back then. The beauty standard was for both black men and black women to have Caucasian-looking hair. Not everyone opted for relaxer, though. Some stuck to the hot comb, which was honestly the safest option back then and now. One causes heat damage and the other health issues. Pick a struggle. The policing of afro hair and afro features is one of the reasons why many generations fetishized biracial women. They had the hair many black Americans were told was well kept and acceptable in the business and entertainment industry, and they passed what was back then called the paper bag test. It also created the stereotype or false idea that a person who is mixed race or appears mixed race must have good hair. Good hair was back then only referred to people who had straight, wavy, or loose curls. In other words, if your hair was an afro, it wasn't deemed to be good hair. But wait, we still haven't gotten to what India, Japan, and China have to do with all of this. Well, the relaxer solution wasn't enough. You see, relaxers cause damage to each hair strand. It weakens your hair, meaning your hair loses its natural volume and thickness. You can often see just how extreme relaxers are by comparing afro hair that's been straightened with relaxers to afro hair that's been straighter with straighteners such as the hot comb. Straightened afro hair tends to be thicker with loss of volume when healthy. Relaxed hair is always very flat and thin in comparison. In comes the sew in weave. Wigs have always existed and date back to ancient Egypt. However, the sew in weave was new in the game. In the 1950s, Christina Jenkins invented the sew in weaves. What did this mean? It meant black American women didn't have to go through relaxers or the painful hot comb. Instead, they could hide their hair away. How? By cornrowing their hair and sewing human or synthetic hair over it. It made their day-to-day life easier, helped society accept them more, helped to not feel excluded from America's beauty standards, and most importantly, it helped not damage one's hair with toxic chemicals. Christina Jenkins' invention is still popular to this day. Without her invention, lace fronts would have never come to be. Nowadays, human hair is mostly used for wigs and weaves, with women spending at least $200 for a good quality wig. But where does the hair come from and money go to? It mostly comes from and does to India, Brazil, the US, Indonesia, and Thailand. India being at the top of the list is not surprising though, since many donate their hair in temples for spiritual reasons and never find out where their hair goes to. In 2024 alone, India has made at least 500 million US dollars from exporting human hair. 2 years ago, it was over 700 million. Who knows? Maybe that's why most Afro hair stores in Europe are owned by Indians and Pakistanis. Any European country you go to, you will find an Indian store selling Indian groceries, fufu powder, wigs, and Afro hair products all in one store. I guess they know where the money is at. But India isn't the only one making crazy money from Afro hair dysmorphia. If you love braiding or twisting your hair with extensions, then you would have heard of Kanekalon hair. Kanekalon hair was invented in Japan, and nowadays most synthetic braiding materials are made in Japan and China. The black hair market is very lucrative, which is why many of the Afro hair products companies are being bought by other companies one by one. Looking at you, my L. But I will save my thoughts on the natural hair trend and its products for another video. Share your thought in comment section below and let me know what I missed.